Hello viewers, leaving a high control group can be stressful and problematic, but things can get especially complicated if you awaken from your indoctrination when you are married. Here to tell their story are today's guests, Sacha and Sherrie from Australia. Sacha and Sherrie, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, Lloyd.
So I guess the obvious place to start is how did we get to this situation? Because we've obviously been friends for a while now. We chat quite a bit on Facebook, and you have told me your story in the past, but it's always nice to get a refresher so that I can understand what brought you to this situation where you're on an apostate YouTube channel telling your story.
Well, yeah, thank you for having us. This is an amazing privilege to be able to chat to you and to chat to everybody. It has been many years in the coming. And yes, an apostate channel. I'm quite happy to use that word apostate. We're not ashamed of that word in any way, shape or form. But yeah, it's certainly been a long and interesting journey, but one that has made our lives a heck of a lot better. And has certainly resulted in a great deal of happiness for us. So we'd love to share some of those things with you and the viewers today.
Please do. And I'm a little bit hazy on who woke up first.
I was much slower.
Well, I guess where do we start? We start from the
very beginning.
Start from the beginning.
Reminds me of a song.
Well, I suppose, first of all, our background, we were born and raised, obviously, into the organisation. We were raised as absolute true believers. We had absolutely no doubt that this was the truth. This was Jehovah's one organisation. We had the privilege of being born and raised into the right organisation. Of course, every person who's religious feels that they've been born into the right organisation, but we, of course, had the truth. We were confident.
They were different. You were the exception.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we took things very seriously. And I guess that's the thing we probably want to say from the beginning, is that we were not fence sitters. We were not wishy-washy witnesses. We took things seriously. We believed we were doing the right thing to worship the Almighty using his one true organisation.
We're all or nothing kind of people. So when there is a cause that we believe in, it's 110%. We put everything into it. And I think Sacha and I didn't meet till we were 19. But at that point, both of us were already regular pioneering. I was baptised at 14. I think you were 15 when you were baptised. And yeah, I mean, I would describe myself as a serious child, very anxious for approval and wanting to meet the expectations placed on me by the organisation. I remember being told as a child that you want to make Jehovah happy. So even though I had no witness friends or any other witnesses in school, that very much rang in my mind as a child. At the age of 9, I decided to be a regular pioneer, and that was it. I stuck to that. It was, I think the message we're trying to get across is that it was everything that we were, and it moulded all of our decisions, even who we were going to be interested in. When it got to courtship, it had to be someone in full-time service. It wasn't going to be anybody else. So Sacha was pioneering, and then he applied to Bethel and served in Bethel in Sydney for 5 years. I pioneered for 10 years. But we were, crazily enough, it was just everything to us.
Yeah.
Wow. And what changed?
Well, I guess many things. It's very hard to pinpoint one specific thing, and I suppose that's the case with most people who start to wake up from any high control religious organisation. It's not one specific thing. There's one thing that perhaps might be the straw that breaks the camel's back, but there were a series of things. And I suppose for both of us, we've always been very diligent, very studious, very academic and thorough when it came to investigating our beliefs and our faith.
Well, as academic as you can be when you're not allowed higher education.
Well, that's true. That's a side point, yeah. Very true. But we took things very seriously. So as Sherrie said, I spent 5 years in Bethel. And I think it's fair to say in these sorts of interviews too, I think it's appropriate to say that there were positives. There were things that we enjoyed. We enjoyed our full-time service years. We felt that we were doing the right thing. So there was that deep satisfaction. We were making Jehovah's heart rejoice. We were helping our brothers and sisters. We were doing the right thing that we could possibly do. So we don't look back and complain about the time that we spent. We are very much positive people who look at the things that were enjoyable during that time. So the 5 years I spent in Bethel were enjoyable. I felt that they were rewarding and satisfying. I hope that I contributed toward the organisation's work at the time. I felt that I was pleasing Jehovah with the work that I was doing, and I got to meet some lovely people and work along with some beautiful people in the time that I was there. I got to observe some unusual and strange things too at times, and I suppose that maybe those things were filed away in the back of the mind as one of those many straws that eventually can break a camel's back. But all in all, there were positives, and I enjoyed my time in Bethel. And for those that I worked along with or lived with there, I hold no animosity or any ill will. In fact, I'd welcome them to our home any day if they were ever so inclined. So we think very fondly about all these ones. I got to work along with a brother who later is serving now on the branch committee in Australia. He was a lovely, lovely brother, a hard worker, and somebody that I respect for his hard work and his leadership as a very humble and diligent worker at Bethel. And I feel very fondly toward these ones. And I think it's important for us to stress that there is no bitterness or any animosity toward any individuals.
No.
Individuals, as you've said many times, the individuals are victims of an organisation. They perhaps haven't had the opportunity to look at things the way we all have. So we hold open.
If anything, we're having this conversation because we care about people who are inside, and we don't want them to have regrets at some point in the future. And maybe by sharing our story or your story, it's going to provide food for thought. I'm just kind of wondering, I mean, you mentioned that there being kind of multiple straws, but there must have come a point where, Sacha, you thought, I can't believe this anymore, and you were in a situation where you're married. Talk us through that moment.
So that was many years on. We got married. We pioneered together. We were completely dedicated toward our service to Watchtower, or we'd say to Jehovah at the time, as we thought. But for me, the beginning of things was probably when the organisation started to change. Many of us have used the expression that around about that 2012, 2013, the organisation didn't seem to resemble the one that we grew up in. And the expression, the light gets brighter or things change, just didn't cut it anymore. There were certain things that were so drastically different, as we all know if we've ever done any investigating, that it just made my curiosity, it raised curiosity. I had to analyse things and I had to think, what's changed? So was it me? Was it just my fault? Was I perhaps not being spiritual enough? Was I not perhaps devoted enough to my personal Bible reading and my prayer and my relationship with Jehovah? Or was there something more tangible to that? And I think probably the annual general meeting in 2013, if I remember right, when the new Bible was released, was probably one of those pivotal moments where something just didn't sit right. And I know that often we say, if something doesn't feel right, there's probably a reason for it. And I was very much committed and dedicated to our organisation, of course, at that time. In fact, I set up all of the videos and the projectors and the connection for the broadcast. I was integral and part of that, and I enjoyed doing that. The sound and the sound department at the Kingdom Hall was something I took a great deal of pride in. So I set all of that up, but I still felt that the content of that presentation was unusual, to say the least.
What specifically? Because I can remember that annual general meeting very clearly, or annual meeting it's called. And I wrote about it at the time, of course, on JW Survey, and I found there were a few interesting moments. But I'm obviously fascinated to hear from a completely devoted JW's point of view, what was it that grated about that particular event?
I think it was the fact that the governing body that we had long held with a great deal of regard for being behind the scenes were now front and center on our presentation. And we got to see them as men with all of their human characteristics. But it was more so the way that they presented some of the material, and the presentation, like some leading software or phone company of the new apps, almost like a Steve Jobs presentation of the new apps, seems strange to me. The boasts made about the production of the Bible and Jehovah's Spirit evidently being upon the printing of the Bible, because
controlling the weather.
Yeah. Meanwhile, there was typos inside the Bible and on various pages. Things like that just struck me as being unusual. I thought the organisation had moved from a level of seriousness and dignity for biblical respect to a sensationalist, almost like an advertising presentation, almost Scientology style in the presentation is how it came across to me at the time.
And Sherrie, how did you register, if you did register Sacha's feelings at this point? Was he able to kind of keep them from you, or did he say anything? Were you aware that he wasn't receiving the annual meeting in quite the way he should have been receiving it as a JW?
Yes, I was. It was an unusual time because we were in different states just due to circumstances. I was visiting my sister down in Melbourne. So I was in the Yarra Valley. That's right, beautiful part of Australia. But I was down there for the annual meeting, and I got all swept up in it. I thought it was fantastic. There's a real play on emotion looking back now. That was probably the significant difference to me, was that they were really tugging on the emotions and on the heart chords. So my heart chords were tugged, and I thought it was fantastic, and new Bible and how wonderful Jehovah's providing for us. I get back home eager to hear what Sacha had to say, and I wasn't expecting his response. It was clear to me that he was not comfortable with it. He struggled to articulate exactly what it was he wasn't comfortable with. And I was quite surprised. I was a bit taken back because, I was filled with the Spirit and thinking it was all wonderful. But I value Sacha's opinion. So for him to say, just didn't feel right, it's a bit unusual. This is not the same organisation. They're presenting things differently. I did take stock and note what he was saying, but I didn't question too much. I just thought, okay, well, that's Sacha's opinion, and we'll just carry on with life. Go back to work, all the activities that you're involved in. But I do remember that being a notable event. That was probably the first time that Sacha had said something that wasn't positive and glowing.
Although, if we do backtrack just slightly, a couple of years before that, when the new songbook was released.
Oh, yes, that's true.
That was an interesting time for us both, where we received that new songbook with eagerness. That was the one that had the picture on the front of people that we knew personally. So that we were whipped up in the emotion of how wonderful it was to receive the new songbook. But we would flick through that together as we were preparing for our meeting, doing our family worship together and being ready for the meetings. And a comment kind of came out of my mouth. I said, it feels like the organisation is dumbing things down. And of course, we've all made that comment since. But I think for me, when I saw the songbook, then we started to see the change in the presentation at the annual meeting, the new Bible, the condensed magazines, the change in the format of different tracts and material. We were struck by a dumbing down of the message. And as much as we tried to say, well, this is so it could reach more people around the world, and the truth is not complicated, it's designed to reach people who are humble and hungry for the truth, it still struck me that the academia of past was gone. We weren't studying the deep things of the Word of God anymore, and things just seemed to be a little bit dumbed down.
Sure. So you have this kind of exchange about the 2013 annual meeting. It's clear that you haven't both been swept along or enthralled by it. Take us further down the journey of this kind of detachment from your belief, Sacha, and how that may or may not have caused issues with Sherrie.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think probably similar time to that, shortly after. All this time I was an appointed man as a ministerial servant, so I was delivering public talks and talks on the meeting and taking the field service groups and doing all of the assignments, account servant, sound operator, all of those sorts of things as well. I was active in doing everything around the Kingdom Hall. I took a pride in keeping the library tidy and neat and clean at the Kingdom Hall. And about that time we had, I was assigned a talk on the service meeting. I can't remember the exact title, but it was something along the lines of appreciating our rich spiritual heritage. And it was a part in the Kingdom ministry at the time that encouraged us to have a thorough look at the old publications, to look at our spiritual heritage of our organisation. And so I took that seriously. And the Kingdom Hall Library where we were at had a lot of the old publications. And in fact, that also reminded me, probably one of those straws that broke the back, that was saying, even in the time that I was in Bethel, the Bethel Library had all of the old publications going back to the very beginning of the organisation. And I would look at those periodically. But of course, back then, just assumed, I didn't look at them deeply. I just looked at the material, the book itself, not the content. But for this part, I took this part seriously. So I thoroughly looked at the rich spiritual heritage. And that part also encouraged us to think about our personal situations, our families, and whether we have generations in the truth. And if we were privileged to be raised by a family that might have 1, 2, 3, or 4 generations of witnesses. So it was the act of doing that talk that made me notice some really disturbing and unusual things in the old publications. And for any of us who have spent time looking through the Finished Mystery or books like that, I think it speaks for itself. And a lot of it can be excused as the culture of that period of time of humanity, but a lot of it can't be excused away if we were speaking for God. And I found myself in a situation where here I was supposed to promote these books and our rich spiritual heritage, when I felt that some of it was really inappropriate and really disturbing and really odd. Some of the things that Pastor Russell was teaching, some of the things that Brother Rutherford was writing, I just thought they were unusual and odd and embarrassing, to be honest, for the organisation. So it was doing that talk. I kind of glossed through that talk, encouraged everybody to read through the library. But then only a short time after that, I can't remember exactly when, we had a working day at the Kingdom Hall. And the presiding overseer or coordinator of the body of elders at the time assigned a few of us to go into the library and pull out all of the books that were older than mid-70s, I think it was, maybe 1980, and put them all in a box and throw them onto the rubbish pile to go to the garbage tip. And I can remember thinking, but I've just devoted this time into doing this talk a short time back. We've just been encouraged to do. Why are we doing it? So I had a little bit of a chat to him and said, why are we throwing these away? And he said, there's been a letter from the society. We need to clear the library of older publications. Now, I must say, I was a little rebellious. I put them all into a box and hid them all underneath the Kingdom Hall. And I borrowed a different book every week and took it back and read it thoroughly.
Well, I would
And
say
so-
salvaged because they were destined for destruction. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I don't know what happened to them since, but it served its purpose. For
yeah.
me, an expression that I heard once on a very good podcast, they said, once revealed, never concealed. And these things that were revealed, I couldn't unlearn what I had just learned. I couldn't ignore the things that I'd read in the publications. And so for me, the cracks really appeared, and it was not from any apostate sources. It was from the society's own printed materials that my questions and doubts appeared.
And Sherrie, what was your response at this time?
I didn't know all that was going on. He did tell me that he was disturbed by the instruction to get rid of all of the old books. And I must say that kind of didn't sit well with me either. I thought that was odd. Aren't we supposed to appreciate our history and where we came from? So I didn't understand that instruction either. And I understood that he was upset. But I didn't know that he was then reading them. He would just mention a few little things. Like he mentioned pyramidology, which struck me as really bizarre. But again, I was too scared to ask too many questions. I think I knew on a subconscious level that something was happening, and that I couldn't even define it more than that. I was too scared to go past that. I just carried on as per normal, but listened to whatever he wanted to share with me. But we didn't go too deep, if that makes any sense.
And may I interrupt? Just, it's not that this stopped us from our theocratic activity.
No.
No.
I was always the first at the hall at 5 to 7. I was always the last to leave at 10 p.m. to open the hall, to close the hall. We were fully active in our theocratic activities. We were out witnessing as much as possible, midweek or weekends. It didn't stop our activity, but it did. There was something in the back of our minds, I guess, that had been planted.
There was also some things happening within the congregation too, some behaviours that you expect when you're a witness. You'll say, oh, it's imperfection, it's men just not applying the scriptures as they should. And that was happening in our congregation as well. I assume it would be happening in any congregation. But I think our discussions when we'd come home from the meeting, we would have seen something that happened. Someone who wasn't one of the brothers and sisters in the congregation who was really trying very hard, but they weren't being treated with love and kindness. And I noticed that Sacha was becoming an advocate for these ones. He was speaking up and defending them, whereas you had the elders in the congregation that were kindly applying the whip. If you need to do more, you need. We're compassionate and we treat you kindly, but you're not doing enough, is the message that was coming across. And Sacha was the defender. He would be, but you don't know what's going on in their personal lives. Have you spoken to them and heard what's going on? So while things were happening where Sacha was reading older publications, there were things happening within the congregation as well that both he and we didn't think was Christian. It wasn't the correct application of the principles that we've been raised to believe. Love was not being shown. There was a harshness there. And both of us were on the same page with that. We didn't think that was right. But, where else do you go? So at that point, we just continued as usual.
Yeah. And exactly right. Because we had been raised with the culture, of course, that an individual's faults, if we might say, or personality flaws shouldn't be taken out on Jehovah, we would excuse these things. And some of the disturbing behaviour I saw in some of the brothers taking the lead did bother me, but I would raise it with them. I'd have a conversation. Sometimes the brothers would approach me and have a conversation and say that I think the expression that was levelled at me was that I'd become an apologist for those who weren't doing enough in the congregation. To which I would say, well, isn't that what Jesus did? He was trying to be kind. And of course, they then assumed that I was comparing myself to Jesus, which wasn't what I was trying to say. I was saying that we need to treat our brothers and sisters kindly. We need to be looking for the good in one another. in fact, I had talks where I would be able to use the material in the talk to speak about that. Be kind to one another. Be considerate. Go out of our way to help one another. And I would be counselled for promoting a personal opinion. And
I was going to say, I'm starting to see why you were a servant and not an elder. You weren't good elder material, I'm afraid.
Well, interestingly, with that though, I had one of the brothers on 2 occasions call me for a private chat, saying, in fact, on one time he used the expression. He said, "We want to appoint you as an elder. We're going to get you across the line at the next circuit overseer's visit." And he said, "How do you feel about that?" And I said, "Well," and hand on my heart, this is how I feel. I said, "I'm not after stripes on the sleeve. I'm not after position or appointment. That's not who I am. If I can help the brothers and sisters by being a ministerial servant instead, or if they feel more comfortable to talk to me or approach me or ask me for a coffee so they can unburden, well, I'm happy to do that. I don't have to have the stripes on the sleeve." I think that was a bit of a tipping point. That brother took that in fact, he used the expression that you don't seem to appreciate theocratic opportunities. And I didn't understand. Now, perhaps he was more focused on position or title. I don't know. I can't speak for him, but that wasn't what I was about. I wasn't about position and title. But the fact that I turned it down, so to speak, or said no to it on these occasions, I think put me perhaps in the spotlight with the brothers, and perhaps they wondered why. And at that time, yes, I'd learned some of these disturbing things about the organisation, but that wasn't my reason for refusing. It was just, I also didn't want to be part of the boys' club of some elders that had strong personalities or who I felt perhaps weren't acting in the most loving way. I didn't want to be part of that, and made that decision to not.
Well, I applaud that, definitely. I'm just wondering at what point, I mean, at the moment, you've told us about the general meeting, you've told us about the older publications. At what point did it all become too much?
Right.
International.
Yeah, the 2014 International Convention, it was held in Melbourne in Australia for most of the east coast of Australia. It was a big event, obviously, as it was around the world. It was one of the last of the big conventions that was held before the regional convention arrangement was brought into place and held in smaller locations. We went to a great deal of effort to go down, as did everybody. We had to travel, stay in a hotel, took time, money, etc. But that was the start too of the new format of
Videos.
Yeah, videos. Yeah. And that was one of the first of that manipulative video of the paradise scene.
Well, yeah, was that the resurrection video?
Yes.
I think, yeah.
Yes. So I think that really started to feel uncomfortable, and I was prompted to then do a little bit more research. And that's, I guess, where I started to tip into apostate sources, to understand that it wasn't just me going insane, but these things didn't feel right. And was I alone with that, or were there other people feeling the same way? And that's where I stumbled across some of the well-known sites such as JW Survey, JW Facts, and many others who were active or who are active on the internet. At a similar time, probably about 6-12 months before that, I'd started to lurk on some of the forums, the support forums that are on the internet. Whilst I hadn't actually become a member, I was on some of the forums. There's a forum known as jehovahswitness.com. I guess that was a safe landing place for me at the time. And I did then venture onto that forum with an anonymous username, which reflected the state that I was in. I felt at that time that I was just stuck in a rut. I was stuck in a situation where I couldn't change because of how invested we were in the organisation, but it didn't feel right. And I felt like I didn't know what to do. And so
how did it feel to be going on these websites and forums? I'm assuming it was behind Sherrie's back. How did that feel?
I felt like I was being deceitful, truthfully. I felt like I I would love to have shared things with Sherrie, but out of respect for her and her personal journey or her situation, I couldn't burden her or bombard her with the things I was learning on that site. I couldn't come to her and say, guess what? I couldn't do that. That would be unkind. So I guess I felt like I was being deceitful. But at the same time, these things, I had to explore them. I had to investigate, and the research became addictive, and I spent more and more time on there. And I now proudly say I got to meet some amazing people and make some amazing friends through those forums, and I really appreciate it. And I know that I encourage anybody who's discovering things about the organisation, find your safe landing place, find your safe support network, whether it's Reddit or forum I spoke about, or any of the support groups, the Facebook support groups, and just share your thoughts with people. Interestingly, you'll find a lot of people are not going to jump on and try and push a particular frame of thinking or a theist or atheist viewpoint or religious or anti-religious. They're just going to support you as a person. And that's what I found was really valuable. We're just supported as a person on that. But I was on that forum, but I did venture so far as to reach out then. And I remembered that I was part of the, let's say, the overlapping generation at Bethel that was privileged to spend a bit of time there while Paul Grundy from JW Fax was there. So I thought, well, there's a little bit of a connection there. So I'll reach out, and I sent him a message through the forum asking if we could possibly catch up for a coffee. Poor Paul, he got these messages from some anonymous person who says, I sort of remember you from Bethel days, but I can't say who I am, and I'm still a ministerial servant, and I'd like to talk to you, but I'll get back to you. And 6 months later, I did it again, and Paul's shaking his head. He tells me later, thinking, we could just have a coffee and talk.
Yeah.
But I appreciated his body of work, obviously, and his website and all the research he put in was integral for me in helping me to understand that I wasn't alone.
And Sherrie, did you suspect that Sacha was doing any of this? Were you? No.
I was completely oblivious. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't something going on. I knew something was happening to both of us, actually. The fire wasn't there like it had been before, and things weren't sitting right. Things weren't comfortable. And after the 2014 International, I mean, I tried to get whipped up with the emotions of it all, and internationals are quite a sensational event. And I had chance to catch up with ones that I'd pioneered with from years before. But Sacha was not himself at all during that convention. In fact, the Sunday he was in a pretty foul mood, I have to say. Just the excitement was not getting him at all. And so I knew things just weren't quite right. And I think it was the following circuit assembly where both of us just didn't want to be there. We felt like we didn't belong anymore. We just didn't feel comfortable. So we left fairly early, I think, from the assembly. So I didn't know how far it went for Sacha. I had absolutely no idea. But in my heart of hearts, I knew that something was changing, but I couldn't articulate what it was at that point. I couldn't imagine not being a witness anymore. And in fact, it might have been January 2015, because things were heating up in the congregation. The elders were applying more pressure to Sacha. They weren't happy with him. They didn't like how he was answering in the watchtower, how he was doing his talks, because he had this very loving way. And I think the elders had just, from my point of view, they'd put Sacha into a little box and thought that's how he's going to behave, that's how he's going to act. And they were not willing to see anything genuine or sincere in him. So January 2015, things were really heating up within the congregation, and they were starting to ask to have meetings with him. And at the same time, I was working quite hard full-time, and I developed a friendship with a mentor, and she's quite a few years older than me, but she can really get to the heart of the matter of a few things. And there was one afternoon in January where we happened to spend some time together, the three of us, and we shared with her that a few things were happening in the congregation, and that the elders were, my view, they were after him. And she said, I don't think it's going to be much longer before you're both not witnesses anymore.
And that shocked us.
And my mouth just dropped. I was just like, I hadn't even thought about that as a possibility. And it really took me back, because this was an outsider who was looking at the situation from a very objective point of view without any bias. And that was her take. So while I didn't know how things were going, particularly for Sacha, and how far it was going, I knew something was going on.
And it's true. If I'm honest, looking back now, I did use some of my talks as an opportunity to raise people's thinking, or to try and create cognitive dissonance or thinking ability. I had a talk that had to talk about creating unity in the congregation, and I wrote on the board 2 words, unity and uniformity, and used it as an opportunity to analyse what is the difference between the two. I know what I was doing now, if I'm honest. I was trying to get ones to think outside of the box. No doubt the brothers picked up on that. Or if I was doing a Bible highlights talk that spoke about one of the genocidal attacks of the Israelites upon the nations and killing man, woman, child and animal, devoting to destruction, I would raise questions in that Bible highlights section like, well, what do we say to somebody in the territory if they ask us how this demonstrates God's love? Well, brothers, that's a question that I've been asked.
I'm amazed you weren't bundled off the platform doing that kind of thing.
So was I stirring the pot? Probably, yes. Probably. But hey, the society taught us to speak with a fire. So
yeah,
Ezekiel had a fire within his bones. So these things were troubling me, and I was probably at that early stage of waking up. So having those opportunities like talks and so on.
So you're kind of both heading in that direction, but one of you is further along in that direction, shall we say, and the other perhaps isn't. When do we get to the part where you're kind of putting the cards on the table and saying, well, here's the situation? Right. And what was the reaction?
There were a few things before that I shared with Sherrie as I was starting to wake up. A few little tidbits of information I would show her. For example, the famous quote from Rama Singh, the misquote of the material in the Awake magazine. I was taking the group that weekend, and I said to Sherrie, I don't know how I can encourage the brothers and sisters to offer this magazine when this quote...
So for viewers who don't know, we're talking about a scientist who was misquoted in, was it the January 2015 Awake?
Yes.
And he was misquoted to give the impression that he was against evolution, when in fact the whole point of his article was to say that people didn't understand evolution well enough, and if they did, there wouldn't be such a problem accepting it. And so you shared that misquote with Sherrie.
Yeah, and I used that as an opportunity to say, but I've noticed this a couple of times before, and I found the Watchtower that used a quote in 1989 saying that the work would be completed before the end of the 20th century, and then I photocopied from the bound volume where it had been changed to the work would be completed in our day. And I just left those with Sherrie and said, I find these really disturbing and uncomfortable. I'm not sure what to make of it, but I would leave it. I wouldn't push the point. By that stage, I think I realised this was not the truth. I had realised that maybe a year or so before that. But how to wake Sherrie up? Well, I didn't feel it was right or appropriate to bombard her with too many things, but I could just drop little things and then leave it up to her if she wanted to ask anything else, or she's very clever and studious. She can research for herself. So I would just drop those comments of things that had disturbed me. And I had in my mind, being stuck in a rut of things, I had in my mind that I would slowly just share more and more information with Sherrie. But at the same time, I was also mindful of just trying to create a supportive and maintain and build a supportive marriage, and help Sherrie with the things that she was focused on. And also, as many people on the forum had encouraged, just create a fun environment that was separate from the Jehovah's Witness activity or routine. So I would say to her a couple of times a month, I'd say, how about we take this Sunday off and go for a nice drive and maybe do some shopping or go out for lunch. So I would slowly introduce the fun activities of life and maybe just wean us back from some of the Jehovah's Witness activity.
Yeah.
And
Sacha was very supportive. I noticed a change in his behaviour in those years from 2012 through to where we're talking to now, 2015. Notably, in those times, I was working full-time for the same employer I am now, and having that all or nothing personality, I threw myself into work, was heavily involved in that, and because it was about cancer, I saw that as a really worthwhile cause, so I got quite involved in that. And in 2012, my employers wanted me to get a qualification, and they were going to pay for me to have a diploma, get a diploma, which would be a 2-year course by correspondence, but while working full-time. And I remember talking to Sacha about it and explaining to him that it was something I wanted to do. And this was 2012, and Sacha was, how are you going to fit everything in, Sherrie? The meetings can't suffer, and field service, and everything I would have expected him to say, he said. But then when I neared the completion of the diploma in 2014, Sacha had changed in that time. Initially, he wasn't very interested in the diploma and didn't ask questions on, what are you working on? What's this assignment about? Because at that time, if I just interject, I was being counselled by the brothers for allowing my wife to do a university course and being told that my privileges would be taken away if she continued to do the course.
So you seriously got counselling over that?
Yes,
Wow.
I did.
Wow.
And I said, but she's studying so that she can be more effective to help people who are suffering with cancer. You've had someone with cancer, brother. You've had someone with cancer, brother. Isn't it good that we have these people who are doing this? So it's not to gain prestige. It's not to gain prominence. It's not to earn money. It's to help people have a quality of life if they are going through cancer treatment. And I support her for that. And I was told adamantly that if I was supporting university education, that was grounds for losing my privileges.
Wow.
There was so much that happened in that time over that.
Did you lose your privileges?
Yes, but it wasn't over that.
Right, yeah. Well, obviously, I know you're not going to the meetings anymore, but yeah. Wow, I'm amazed at that. I mean, I kind of, it's expected, but at the same time, you're always still bowled over when you hear actual evidence of that kind of mentality.
Oh, we knew we had to keep it quiet. So initially, it was very hush-hush. We didn't tell anybody that I was doing the course. But as the course progressed and I became excited about what I was learning.
And I was proud of Sherrie's accomplishments.
It just, the dynamic was shifting between the two of us, and Sacha was becoming more supportive. He wanted to know what I was working on late 2013 into 2014. He wanted to become involved and, I'll read your assignment before you submit it. And I really appreciated that feedback from him. And to have him involved. And he also got involved with some of the fundraising activities at work. I wanted to support those because, again, as I say, I thought it was a good cause. And Sacha put his hand up to help out with those fundraising activities, even organising one of them. And it just took me to this whole other level of appreciating my husband, who was supporting me in my endeavours and in what I wanted to do. Our relationship deepened as a result. In amongst everything else happening, our relationship was becoming closer because he was supporting the things that I wanted to do. So this is all leading to where it all came out and where I learned what was going on. But I thought it was important to mention that just to sort of set the background.
Sure.
In order for me to do that diploma, we needed help with Sachas' business because I was doing his bookkeeping as well as working full-time to try and fit in the activities of a witness and a diploma. Something was going to break. So we asked a young sister in the congregation to help us out with bookkeeping and offer her a job. She'd just left school. She wanted to pioneer. So we thought, well, if you're happy to, we'll train you what to do. And she was great. She worked really well. She was doing a day a week. And then after about a year of doing that, she asked for more work to support herself. So I gave her work at the practice where I was working as well. So we were solely responsible for her income, but she worked hard. She was diligent.
Yeah. We felt like she was part of the family, and have no ill will toward her, and appreciate the work that she did while she was working with us.
Yeah, but things reached a bit of a head, being one for dates, June 4th, 2015, when we received a phone call from her on a Saturday afternoon. She'd been working with us for 3 years by this point. It was out of the blue, and she just said, oh, Sacha, I'm calling to let you know that I can't work for you anymore. And we were in the car actually at the time, and both of us were quite shocked. And Sacha said, well, why? And she said, you know why. And then I think she perceived that Sacha was not alone in the car. And so she very quickly then went, I can't talk anymore, and hung up. So Sacha and I look at each other, what is that about? I had no idea. Sacha had no idea. He tries to call her back. She won't answer the phone. So eventually Sacha then calls her father, who happens to be one of the elders in the congregation. And I think you should probably take over from there.
Oh, okay.
You were on the phone.
I just asked, what's this about? And eventually, after all of that chasing up, he said, well, you've been on apostate websites. And of course, I've got to be honest, my heart sank, and I thought, oh, the jig is up. Here we go. This is going to be...
So she had found out through working for you that you'd been on apostate websites.
She'd fossicked around on the computer and found the websites, and then gone straight to the elders and told them.
The father had said that she saw something about Jehovah's Witness and thought she'd click on the history of the browser.
Oh yeah, she just accidentally found herself clicking through the browser history.
That's right.
Yeah.
And let's not even raise the issue that we've been advised legally. We could have pursued legal action because what she was doing was using work computers during work time, or perhaps even her lunch break.
There was a confidentiality agreement in place that had clearly been breached, but
and used that to defame our name or our character amongst people. I understand she was doing what she felt she needed to. The culture of the organisation, of course, is to report someone who's deemed to be apostate. I understand that, but as I said to her father and then to the coordinator, who I phoned straight afterwards, I'm pretty sure the principle at Matthew is that you're supposed to go to somebody first of all and discuss it with them.
Oh, well, Matthew 18 goes out of the window if it's anything like this.
I was told in no uncertain words, the expression used by the coordinator was, it doesn't apply for cases of apostasy. So I said, well, you've made your mind up. They confirmed that they'd had an emergency elders meeting on the Saturday prior to the field service group. They'd sat on it all day. We found out at 2 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon, after a great deal of discussion must have taken place. And that's how we found out about it. I was then pushed to have a meeting. Now, by this stage, I'd learnt through the forums and through the support groups that there's an appropriate line of behaviour that should never be crossed. And I just said to the brother on the phone, I'm happy to chat to you. If you want to go for a coffee, we can talk, but I'm not going to meet with two people. Please respect appropriate boundaries. If you'd like to talk about anything else, but until the sister comes forward to me and makes her case clear, then we have nothing to talk about. And, well, to this day, that's never happened. She's never come forward. They've never told me what they supposedly have on us, and that's fine. But what I found was really interesting in all of that is exactly as you said, biblical principles are not applicable. Now, at that stage, I probably didn't have a great deal of faith in the Bible being the word of God, or if indeed there is a creator. That's another whole discussion we can have at another time. But I did believe that if the organization claims to base its teachings upon biblical principles, they don't have a right to throw them out when they feel it's necessary.
But what you've just described is like the worst nightmare of a husband or wife who is going through the process of waking up to have their, rather than sit down and have a conversation, which I was able to do with Deanna, and in my own case I found that it was easier to actually, it was such an emotional issue for me that I actually had to write a letter to her.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I think there were multiple letters just explaining what process I was going down, and because it was so emotional, I couldn't have that conversation in person. And also, I thought if it's in writing, she can see that I mean it, and I'm not just making it up. So, Sherrie, what were you thinking during this whole debacle?
It's really hard to put that into words. I was shocked. The A word was ever present in my mind. Then knowing that Sacha had gone onto a website, I was horrified. But this was my husband, whom I cared for very much. So I couldn't just discard it. So that weekend we had some real heart-to-heart discussions, and it was difficult for both of us.
Arguments?
No, it wasn't arguments, actually. It was just trying to understand where each other was.
Sherrie was really supportive.
Yeah.
She asked me to explain things, and I'll admit it, the emotion overtook me. I broke down, but I said to her, okay, I will show you. I can take you to that forum now, I'll show you. And I didn't really want Sherrie to go through the pages and pages of things I'd shared, comments I'd put on the forum, but I thought, well, thanks to that sister, thank you for breaking the ice and forcing the situation that otherwise may have gone on for several more years. It gave us an opportunity for me to say to Sherrie, okay, I'll show you the forum. And she asked me to show her the front page.
I couldn't go any further. That was just because I had screaming in my head. Apostate, it's like a siren going off. So I
check the window to see if there's lightning gathering in the...
That's right. It's like I couldn't go any further, but every question I asked Sacha, he answered as sincerely and as honestly as he could. And I could see that it was extraordinarily painful for him as well. He was trying to explain it to me as gently as he could, where he was up to, but he was clearly distressed. And that distressed me, that he was distressed. So it was a hard weekend to try and understand where each other were at. And there were occasions where, filled with fear and uncertainty, I said things that I shake my head at now. I think, because I didn't know where things were at, how much...
Go on, give us an example. You can't say that and not give an example.
We're sitting in the office. We have the website open from the support forum. I showed her the paragraph that said this is just a friendly and supportive place for witnesses or those questioning their beliefs to have a look. I showed her JW's survey, and I showed JW facts.
Actually, no, you hadn't shown those yet. It was just jehovahswitness.com because they came later.
Right, true. But in that moment, Sherrie's question to me...
Only one apostate website at a time, please. We have a saturation point.
True. What I would say, incidentally, for any brothers or sisters, men, women in a situation where one is waking up, there's such a thing apparently called a private browser. I suggest you use that if you are looking at the sites.
You'll have to explain this to me in more detail. I had no idea that existed. It's like...
Right. So, it might be smart to delete your browsing history if you're looking at apostate sites or research.
But what's this embarrassing thing that Sherrie said? I want to know.
Lloyd hasn't forgotten.
Yeah.
There were a few. So first off, I think when I was asking Sacha, I was trying to work out how far his doubts were, and I was using the expression of like, how far down the rabbit hole has he gone? And I asked him what it was, some of the things were that was disturbing him, and he raised Armageddon and said that is Jehovah really going to destroy billions of people and children? And to me at the time, being still very much mentally in, that seemed like such a juvenile thing to say. So, and I said that to him. I said to him, that's something I would expect a teenager to say.
To which I replied, but I never thought about it as a teenager.
And clearly I hadn't either, but I said things like that, and there were other things where out of fear, so how much change are we going to have? You know, I don't want you smoking, and I don't want you taking drugs, because I didn't know, right? Everything was changing, and I didn't know how far the change was going to go.
Did you set a curfew for Sacha? I want to know how far this goes. Yeah.
And in fairness to Sherrie, I understand that, of course, the society has drummed into us that anybody who leaves the truth or becomes apostate naturally goes down the path of drugs and drinking and immorality,
debauchery,
violence.
Yeah. I think I also stipulated something about birthdays and Christmas as well.
Yeah. And so I just said to Sherrie at that moment, I said, well, why should the little 2-year-old next door to us that our neighbours have deserve to die if Armageddon comes tomorrow just because his mummy and daddy didn't take magazines? Why should the little old lady up the street who's volunteered all her life at the animal shelter be killed because she didn't like the Watchtower magazine?
How well attended would those charity events be if everyone who is supposed to die wasn't allowed to come, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that was in that moment when I shared that with Sherrie. She was incredibly supportive. I didn't know what to expect, but I must admit though, on that first night, as we're laying there in bed, I couldn't sleep after the elders had told me, and my mind raced through everything. I assumed, well, naturally, Sherrie's going to leave me. Naturally, I'm going to be on my own, and that's going to be the end of our marriage. I just assumed that was the natural outcome, not because I didn't trust the quality of our marriage, but because I assumed that that's what Sherrie was supposed to do as a faithful witness.
And I
was
knew.
Was that stressful for you, Sacha?
Incredibly.
Yeah.
Incredibly. I'm a feeling person. I have emotions, but I don't generally cry. But that next day, I broke down. And it wasn't to try and gain sympathy from Sherrie. It wasn't manipulative. It was the absolute outpouring of what I now see was years of pent-up stress and cognitive dissonance and frustration coming out. It was an opportunity to just purge. And, well, that was it. It was out in the open. I had nothing more to hide. And in hindsight, I'm glad that happened. But at the time, it was absolutely...
It was heartbreaking to watch. It was just devastating to watch Lloyd, because Sacha is... He's my rock. He's a confident man. He's a fixer, even when I don't want him to fix things. He's got the right things to say. So to see him devastated, and he kept saying, and this just cut me up, I am a good person. Am I a good person? He was doubting himself. This whole catastrophe had got him to the point that he wasn't even certain that he could trust himself, that he was good. It was terrible to see his confidence in himself that ruined. And I couldn't not feel for that. And so I suggested to him, this was only the very next day, do you want to see a counsellor? That might be good for you just to talk it through with someone, because you are a good person. It was, despite everything else, he is a fantastic guy. So he did go and get some counselling, but that was to come.
And that was really helpful.
Yeah.
And I think, for a lot of people like yourself or many people watching, when you learn the truth about the truth, when we realise that it isn't the truth, it's it's absolutely crushing. It takes its tolls. Many people, it's weeks, months worth of heartbreak. It's genuine heartbreak because we assumed it was the truth. For me, I had to stifle that for all that time. And it was, of course, the weekend when I was outed, so to speak, where I actually finally got to let that out. So it was almost like grieving for the second time, but being able to actually do it outwardly. And I really appreciated that Sherrie provided the safe place to be able to do that. While she might not have agreed with the things I was saying or with the decision I'd made, she was supportive of me as a person. And I really appreciated that. And the counselling that she suggested I went to was fantastic. I was able to speak to somebody who had no experience in escaping cults or religious groups, but she was able to just ask rhetorical questions, helped me to see that I wasn't going crazy. Initially, Sherrie had thought perhaps this is a midlife crisis.
I did actually.
Yeah, maybe this is you're crazy, you're cracking up, there's something wrong with you. How's your mental health? How's your physical health? So the counsellor was able to reassure me that I wasn't going crazy and that this was normal, this was acceptable.
And Sherrie, how after this whole what must have been a very unsettling period, how did that influence your personal journey of awakening?
Well, it was pretty difficult initially because the next day on Monday I had to go to work and I had that same sister to face because she was working at the same workplace. And that was really, really hard because I wanted to say a few things and I couldn't. So that was really challenging. And then also I had one of the elders phoning me at work, trying to get information from me about Sacha.
Oh, good grief.
And I did not appreciate this at all. I just thought it was incredibly inappropriate. I felt
that's fascinating because I obviously had the same thing with Diana, with elders pulling her to one side. Yes. It's amazing how suddenly it's appropriate to try and get information on someone without them being present, as though there's like a police investigation underway. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But that at the same time you have this built into you that, oh, it's an elder calling, I have to answer his questions. So even though you feel it's a personal invasion and that this is incredibly inappropriate, I still spoke to him. I still talked to him. But when I got home that night, I told Sacha straight away and said, hey, so-and-so called and these were the questions he asked and this is what I said. And Sacha asked me, he said, well, were you comfortable with that? And I said, no, I wasn't. I didn't think it was appropriate for me to be talking about you to someone else. And Sacha said, well, I'll call him and I'll tell him to stop. And he did.
Well, I think I asked Sherrie, would she like me to? I wasn't.
No, you.
I wasn't going to presume to say, well, how dare he call you? It was more along the lines of, if you'd like me to call him. So I called him and I said, I appreciate you talking to Sherrie, but it's not appropriate while she's at work taking care of cancer patients. If you'd like to pop around though and have a chat to me, I'm happy for you to pop around. And he said, well, which other elder would you like to come? And I said, don't need another elder, but you're welcome to come to our place. Come on Saturday, have a coffee with us.
Yeah.
So, and I did say to him, please respect appropriate boundaries and don't phone my wife. And I said, I don't make it a habit to phone your wife and talk about you behind your back. And I think he recognised at that point that I was not going to be trifled with. I didn't raise my voice, but I made it very clear that that's inappropriate behaviour. And he said to me, well, you're welcome to phone my wife if you like. I said, I don't need to, and I wouldn't talk about you behind your back. I appreciate you don't do that to me. So come around on Saturday, we'll have a coffee. And he did. He came around on that Saturday by himself without another elder. And he was quite relaxed and jovial, and he asked some questions. And
that was bizarre, though, because there were a few things that Sacha did raise. Like by this point, Sacha had shared the United Nations with me, which I found jaw-dropping. And so when the elder came that Saturday and he was sort of questioning Sacha as to what his doubts were and what his concerns were, Sacha raised the UN.
Well, I did two things. I did a biblical thing and an organizational thing. I raised, first of all, I said to him, I'm really disturbed. The Bible reading section we've been looking at talks about Lot. And
right.
Lot and the way he acted with his daughters. I said, I can't reconcile that. I find that really inappropriate behavior, and I just can't understand how Lot can be viewed as a righteous man worthy of imitation when he acted in a way that would now justifiably have you locked up in prison.
Yeah.
And he said, yes, I've been disturbed by that at times too. So then, organizationally, he asked how do you feel about that? And I was careful not to answer the question that elders try and do, which is, do you believe this is God's organization? At that time, I wasn't ready to be so specific. Here on record, I'll say, absolutely not. It is not God's organization. But at that time, I said to him, well, I'm disturbed about things such as the organization's attachment and affiliation with the United Nations for a period of time. And I gave a brief rundown, similar, thank you, to the material presented in your video. And he said, yes, I've heard that too. I know all about that. And I said to him, and you're not disturbed by it? No. And so I recognized in that moment that there was a marked difference between those who know information and are disturbed by it, or those who can just shelve it and not worry about it.
Yeah.
And I hold nothing against him, but I did lose respect for him in that moment, because I just assumed, how could you, in all honesty, know these things and not have it at least trouble you?
Yeah. So that was the Saturday. The Sunday, so this is now a week after being exposed, we went to the meeting, and I felt like I had to. Sacha went to support me, really, but it was the behaviour of the congregation that I thought, no, I don't want to come again, because the gossip mill had clearly been active. You could tell from the looks, the here. It made you feel so uncomfortable. There was no warmth whatsoever. And this elder that had come on the Saturday was standing guard over us from the beginning of the meeting to the end of the meeting. And I realise now his role was to prevent Sacha from talking to anybody else in the hall.
Which I had no intention of doing. And I made it clear to him in the beginning, I have no intention of subverting anybody else's faith. I made it clear that if people investigate things...
When you say standing guard, what
Okay,
talk us through what that
I don't mean the entire meeting.
He had a flaming sword and he stood at the entrance of the hall.
What was he, sat on the end of your row, or...?
He basically was there from the beginning of the meeting, and then when the meeting started, he went and sat with his family. And the moment the meeting ended, he was back.
Making small talk with us, which
so
I realised...
he was positioning himself physically within, say, a 2-3 meter radius of where you were. Right. Okay.
Talking to us, engaging us in conversation so that we couldn't go to anyone else.
Right.
And I realised that in that moment, he thought that we were going to run around, or I was going to run around the hall trying to whisper into people's ears truths about the organisation, which I have no interest in doing.
Yeah.
But he made it clear that we were, or I was, a dangerous person. And then they tried to continually invite me to a meeting. I said I had no interest in that. But what they did do, which was clearly evident to us, is they had some campaign of maligning our name and character, because people that we were, and remember, we were absolutely invested in the congregation. We were integral members of the congregation. We were the ones that were there for people when they were sick, when they needed shopping done, when they needed pets looked after, when they had emergency disasters, you name it, we were there for everybody. And when they moved house, whatever it was, we were there. In that moment, all of those people that we'd known for 20, 25 years either couldn't look at us or went out of their way to avoid us. And that hasn't stopped for the next 3 years. That's still the case in our local community, even though nobody has specifically asked us anything. So it made it clear to us that the elders had done whatever they felt they had to do, and said, goodness knows what about us, to people who were what we thought close friends. Now, of course, we recognise they weren't real friends. It was a conditional friendship. And we don't hold it against those individuals, although I do think it would be nice if people who we spent social engagements, theocratic engagements, people we were appointed guardians for their children if anything had ever happened to them. This is the level of closeness we had with so many friends. If they'd at least just picked up the phone or come and asked us, what is this business we hear about you? Is it true? Is it not? We never had the opportunity to do that, and we had no intention of getting on the phone and saying anything to anyone else, but it was clear to us that people weren't interested in the truth. And for an organisation that claims to base itself on the truth, I realised that truth was subjective and they didn't really want to know. They would rather believe the slanderous, malicious gossip that went around than come and ask us directly. And for me, I could reconcile it. Okay, I was the apostate. But my issue was for Sherrie. Here were sisters, brothers, sisters that she'd known for years that didn't even show any interest in her. Nobody contacted Sherrie to say, how are you going? Or I've heard something, or the elders have made me aware of something, how are you? Nobody was interested in Sherrie. And perhaps you might want to say more on that, but even none of the elders were interested in how Sherrie was doing.
No, so that, when I saw how the congregation was that first meeting back, I knew what was going to be required of me. I would have to become the spiritual widow. I would have to turn up to the meetings on my own, go out in field service on my own, to maybe get a skerrick of human compassion from them. And I knew I was not going to be able to do that. I'd seen too much in the last few years of how Sacha had been treated, and I thought he'd been treated terribly. The circumstances that had happened 6 months prior to that, when Sacha stood down from being servant, were just deplorable. So I could not have gone to a meeting and had well-intentioned and some not so well-intentioned, because the gossip value just would have been too good, come up to me and sympathise or pretend to sympathise on how they felt about Sacha no longer being there. I would have cracked it. So I knew I could not do that. It was not going to be something I could do. So,
and that coincided with the convention period where they had the video of a sister whose husband had learned.
Oh no, that was actually later. A
little bit later.
Yeah.
But that was ramping up in the organisation, where people were being told that if your spouse becomes apostate, you've got to remain loyal to the organisation and all that sort of thing.
So what did you decide to do, Sherrie, in that situation?
I wanted to see how long it would take before someone showed interest in me, to see how I felt, what I thought. How did I feel about the organisation? I'm still waiting because there was no contact at all. Nobody and as the time passed, I became a little bit more immune to it and just sort of thought, well, they weren't really true friends then. They weren't really concerned for me or for Sacha. So we began to occupy our time on weekends and actually enjoyed weekends for the first time. We just simply stopped going to the meetings, and we stopped field service. But I was
that your last meeting when you were kind of had a bodyguard? Was that your
there
last?
Was one more, if you can call it a meeting. There'd been a sudden death in the congregation in September, and we went to the funeral in the September.
Of a brother that I respected. He had taken time prior to everything going down. He made a comment to me once when we were having a coffee before it was known that I was an apostate. He made a comment that he'd come to the congregation and his aim was to try and sort out some of the personalities there, which I thought was interesting. But he also made a comment, which in hindsight, I wonder now, he said, never stop researching. And I can only assume he's not with us anymore, but I don't know what he meant by that. But that meant we had fond feelings for him, and we went to his funeral. And That was our last
that was
meeting.
the last time we walked into the Kingdom Hall.
And as of now, you, am I right in saying that you were never disfellowshipped, but you are being treated as though you have been disfellowshipped?
Correct.
Yes.
Right.
We didn't send a formal letter in of disassociation. We're not disfellowshipped. We have no reason. My personal feelings, everybody has different thoughts as they wake up. I personally don't feel that the organisation, that their rules need to be abided by. I don't think I need to send a letter in saying I'm disassociated, because my actions speak for that. I'm not attending. I have disassociated proudly from an organisation that has a track record of being untrue. Some people might feel differently. Some people feel the need to write a formal letter, and I support them in that. But yes, we're not formally disassociated or disfellowshipped, but we let our actions speak for themselves. Sherrie feels the need at times to want to write a letter, and that's fine. My only action I've taken as a proactive thing is I have made a formal request for any data or information that the society holds on me, according to the laws of Australia. I have had no reply on that, but I would like to have any yellow envelopes that have information on me that were held in the congregation permanent file, purely because I feel that it's my right to have information that speaks about me, just as any other corporation or company will freely give up the information they hold on you. I feel the society doesn't have the right to hold information on us. As to whether that happens or not, I don't know. But obviously that would be taken as a very decisive step from in their perspective.
And we're just about out of time, but first of all, I really appreciate you sharing with so much candour what must have been a very emotional and dramatic process. But I'm just wondering, before we wrap up, whether each of you can express what advice you would have to someone who might be watching this video and finds themselves in a similar situation to the situation you've been through.
If I may, I guess one thing, this society likes to paint anybody who is waking up as a bad person or perhaps a flawed person. The classic Return to Jehovah brochure that's given to people like us that we've had shoved underneath our door once or left with us paints the picture that we're at fault, that we've been stumbled by something, that someone's upset us. Well, no. If your reason for leaving the organisation is based upon finding out the truth, if it's based upon a knowledge or an appreciation of truth and honesty, then you have nothing to be apologetic for. And for us, that's exactly the case. We're in this situation because we value truth and honesty. It's because we're trying to be good people. It's because we want to be able to hold our heads high and have an honest conscience. That's why we're not attending the organisation or attending the meetings anymore. So I say to anybody who's out there, keep researching, keep investigating things. You're not doing anything wrong. We have the ability to think clearly. Even if people still have a faith in the Bible encourages us to keep testing the inspired expression, to keep seeing where you stand. And so I encourage people, keep researching, as with anything in life, and take that wherever the truth takes you.
Very well said. And Sherrie?
I would say similarly, but I would just sort of add that you owe it to yourself to find out if it's true or not. If there is a question about it, really you owe it to yourself to find out. If you end up proving it right to yourself, then great. But if you find that it's not true, then you have to ask yourself the question, can you continue to be part of an organisation that isn't true and that is quite harmful? And only individuals can ask that, but I want to be able to look back at my life and be able to say proudly that truth mattered to me and that my own personal integrity mattered to me. I always want to conduct myself in a way that it didn't matter how ugly the truth was, I had the courage to face it and to make the decisions that needed to be made. And so my advice to everyone, everyone's journey is a little bit different, but You owe it to yourself to find out. Don't be afraid of that. There are many of us out here that can provide that soft landing for you to help make it easier. You're not doing it on your own, but you must, for your own well-being, find out, research.
Very well said.
People to, if anyone would like to reach out to us, we'll leave our details with you. We'd love to be able to be a support. If anyone wants to share their thoughts, their waking up process, if they need to vent about things, if they need help in adjusting to the real life that we have, this is our life, let's enjoy it. This is all we have. If they need help, if they'd like support, we'd love to be available. Just as a friend, feel free to contact us.
Doesn't matter that we're down under.
We're in Australia, but we're here for you.
Fantastic. Well, that's a really nice attitude to have. And on a personal note, I know that it's taken a lot of bravery for you to kind of come out and tell your story. Obviously, you're telling your story on YouTube on a channel where there's a whole bunch of subscribers, and you know that there's going to be a lot of views, probably thousands of views for this video. And you've still had the bravery to come forward and express very honestly and candidly what your experience is. And I'm sure there will be lots of my viewers who will sincerely appreciate and value what you've had to say. So thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this interview. I know I have. If you would like to see more interviews like this one, please don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel. But for now, thank you so much for watching.